So you've probably seen it in the movies. The hero gets trapped in a world where time stands still, and he usually spends this time doing things that only make sense when time is stopped. Things like walking through busy streets with thousands of people around you without being able to talk to any of them, or moving incredibly fast through traffic while not actually moving at all. It might be possible to stop time, but the results aren't always what you expect. So let's talk about what really happens when time stands still. We'll start with a bang. Literally, there will be a big explosion. The moment time stops, everything changes. If time stops completely, so does light, because the movement of photons is also subject to the flow of time. In other words, photons can only travel when time is flowing. Now, you may think this doesn't make much sense. After all, we don't experience light as something that moves. Rather, we see light as something that just exists. But even though we perceive light as eternally present, each photon has a limited lifespan. They constantly bounce off atoms and molecules and reflect and bend around objects. All these activities require a certain amount of time. Without the flow of time, there are no longer any conditions for the propagation of light. As soon as time stops, all photons freeze in place. Visible light waves only reach us because they move incredibly fast, almost 300,000 kilometers per second. However, once their movement is interrupted, the last thing you'd see before time stopped would be those countless light particles stuck in midair, frozen forever. The universe would turn dark immediately after time stops. So unless you have a flashlight in your pocket that emits photons outside of time, you're doomed to eternal darkness. Not exactly the kind of future you were hoping for, but even if you had an eternal flame, there wouldn't be anyone there to see it, because time is also the prerequisite for all human perception. Without time, we can neither see nor hear anything. There are no more brain processes, but that's not the only reason why we couldn't survive if time stopped. When time stops, the movement of every molecule in the universe also stops. This means the air molecules in our lungs stop moving, which means we can no longer breathe. But wait a minute, if there's no time, how do we know that our lungs are full of air? Actually, we do know this thanks to the fact that our brain would continue to work for a few seconds, even after time stopped. However, the lack of oxygen would quickly knock us out. In reality, the human body continues to function for a few minutes without oxygen, but since time would be standing still, it would feel like eternity. By the way, the same would happen to every living creature on the planet. Animals would drop dead, plants would freeze in place, and bacteria would cease to multiply. For a brief moment, the entire universe would be utterly silent and still. The only sounds that would break the silence would be the buzzing of insects frozen in mid-flight and the gentle chirping of birds, stopped in their songs. Everything would stay like this forever. However, this state of affairs would change sooner than you think. Because even though time would continue to stand still, the laws of physics would continue to apply. And one of those laws is the law of gravity. But gravity, like everything else, needs time to work, but that's not the only problem. Frozen time would also mean that all chemical reactions come to a standstill. Atoms would no longer combine to form molecules, and even nuclear fusion would end. Stars would no longer shine. Galaxies would drift aimlessly through space, and the heat death of the universe would come a lot faster. At best, you'd only have a few seconds to explore a world without time. And that's assuming you could even exist in such a world. In fact, there's a very good chance that if time stood still, you wouldn't even exist. We often see in films how the main characters get the ability to manipulate time. Heroes who are gifted with these powers usually use them to go back in time and prevent some great catastrophe. But that doesn't work without paradoxes. One of the most famous time travelers, Marty McFly from Back to the Future, inadvertently prevented his parents from meeting, and yet he still ended up existing. Mathematicians have long been trying to find a model that would allow time travel into the past without creating paradoxes. But so far, none of these attempts have been crowned with success. Paradoxes aside, there's another argument against time traveling: the heat death of the universe. If time stopped, nothing new could ever come into existence again. No stars, no planets, no humans, no dogs, no squirrels. If time stops, there's nothing left but the things that already existed. But let's assume that you managed to become a time traveler. Even then, you'd hardly be able to stop time. In the truest sense of the word, you could no longer move anything. And even if you did manage to lift your finger, you'd hardly notice anything. And that's because if time stands still, all our senses would fail. But let us say you exist outside of time, like in those sci-fi shows where the hero moves while everything else freezes. Well, in that case, you could walk down a street and everyone around you would be frozen. However, that would only be true from your perspective. From the perspective of someone who hadn't stopped time, you'd be the one who'd be frozen. If you wanted to get to your frozen neighbor, you'd have to kick him hard, just in case. After all, he might be a zombie who wants to eat your brains. Unfortunately, this method doesn't work either. Your kick would only seem to be aimed at your neighbor. In fact, it would hit him years later. And if you tried to explain to him that you were trying to save him from a future zombie apocalypse, he'd probably just call you crazy. But let's imagine that you managed to break the laws of physics. Let's say you have the power of a black hole, which distorts space and time as it pleases. And let's say you managed to slow down time inside your black hole. Then you could indeed see what was happening outside of your black hole in real time. You could see how the dinosaurs got extinct and how the first humans appeared on Earth. You could watch humanity develop, invent the wheel, and then invent the airplane. You could watch two lovers meet, fall in love, and grow old together. You could observe the birth of stars and the death of galaxies. You could literally see the beginning and end of the universe. However, this gift would drive you mad. Having the ability to stop time would mean having the ability to witness every event that has ever happened and will ever happen. That's an impossible burden for any mind to bear. However, if you manage to withstand this mental pressure, you'll be rewarded with something wonderful. You will well see yourself sitting alone in your room, and then you will well remember that you have the power to stop time. So you click the button in your head and time begins to flow again. You hear a buzzing in your ears, the familiar sound that fills the world when time starts to flow. You open your eyes and see the flickering light of a candle flame. The clock on the wall tells you that a minute has passed since you stopped time, but it feels like centuries have passed. You look out the window and notice that the sun is shining a little lower in the sky than before. It seems like you spent part of your life while time was standing still. And now we want to ask you a question. What would you do if you had the power to stop time? Write us your thoughts in the comments below. And while you're at it, give us a thumbs up for more videos like this one. Thanks for watching. See you next time.